Before we begin tonight's story, if you're enjoying these accounts from the field, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It helps us bring you more of these true experiences from park rangers and law enforcement across America. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's get into what happened in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts. My name is Michael Torres, and I've been working as a park ranger in October Mountain State Forest for over 15 years. I know every ridge, every trail, every body of water in Massachusetts' 16,000 acres of wilderness like the back of my hand. These mountains are my domain, and finding my way around is a breeze, even with my eyes closed, or so I thought. But in October 1989, I found something that shouldn't have been there. Something that was always there. I'm telling you this now because I need someone to know. I need someone to understand what happened, even if you don't believe me. Especially if you don't believe me. Because if I'm right about what I found, then everything we think we know about reality is wrong. And if I'm wrong, then I lost my mind in those woods, and this is just the rambling of a man who couldn't handle the isolation. Either way, someone should know. October Mountain is the largest state forest in Massachusetts, spreading across the Berkshires like a dark green blanket. It's beautiful country, especially in fall when the maples turn red and gold and the air gets that crisp bite that makes you feel alive. I'd moved to the Berkshires right after my divorce 3 years earlier, traded a desk job in Boston for a ranger uniform and a cabin in the woods. Some people thought I was running away. They were probably right. I liked the solitude, liked the predictability of the forest. Trees don't lie to you. Mountains don't promise things they can't deliver. After 15 years of marriage ending in a lawyer's office, that was exactly what I needed. It was a Tuesday morning in mid-October when I found it. I was on a routine patrol, checking the trails after a heavy rain the night before. The storm had been intense, the kind that makes the old cabin shake and tests your faith in the structural integrity of 1960s construction. I was looking for washouts, fallen trees, anything that might pose a hazard to hikers. The trail I was on, the Felton Trail, was one I'd walked hundreds of times. Named after some colonial-era settler, it wound through old-growth forest, past a few abandoned foundations from farms that died out when people realized you can't grow much in rocky mountain soil. It was a moderate hike, popular with families and casual outdoors enthusiasts. About 2 miles in, I noticed something off. The trail forked in a direction I didn't remember. Not a major split, just a subtle divergence, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But I'd walked this trail so many times I could do it in my sleep, and I knew this fork hadn't been there before. Storm damage, I figured. The rain had probably carved a new channel, made it look like a path. But I followed it anyway, curious, always the scientist even when I'm trying not to be. The new path led downhill, through thicker forest than I remembered in this section. The trees were old here, really old, the kind of centuries-old oaks and maples that make you feel small and temporary. The undergrowth was dense, mostly ferns and mountain laurel, and I had to push through in places. After about 15 minutes of bushwhacking, I emerged into a clearing, and there it was. A lake, maybe 200 yards across, roughly circular, surrounded by forest on all sides. The water was dark, that deep black blue you see in mountain lakes fed by underground springs. But what struck me immediately, what made me stop and stare, was how still it was. Perfectly still. No ripples, no movement. The surface was like a mirror, reflecting the sky and the surrounding trees with such clarity it was almost painful to look at. I've seen calm lakes before, but there's always some movement. Wind, insects, fish, something. This water looked like it had been frozen mid-reflection. I checked my map. Nothing. No lake marked in this location. I checked my GPS. The coordinates put me exactly where I thought I was, on the Felton Trail. But according to every map I had, this area should be solid forest. I pulled out my radio. "Base, this is Torres. You copy?" Static. Then Jane Klein's voice, our station manager. "Copy, Torres. What's up?" I found a body of water off the Felton Trail, about 2 miles in down a side path. It's not on any of our maps. You got any records of a lake in Sector 7? A pause. "Negative, Torres. Sector 7 is all forest, no bodies of water larger than seasonal streams." "Well, I'm looking at a lake right now. Maybe 200 yards across. Deep, from the looks of it." Another pause. Longer this time. "That's odd. You sure you're reading your GPS right?" I checked again. "Positive. I'm right where I think I am. The lake just isn't on the map. Could be an old quarry that filled in. Or maybe a sinkhole. You want me to send someone out?" "No, I'll check it out and file a report. Just wanted to see if we had any records. Torres out." I approached the water's edge carefully. The shore was rocky, large, smooth stones worn by water that, according to all official records, didn't exist. I knelt down and looked at the reflection. That's when I felt the first prickle of unease. The reflection was perfect. Too perfect. Every tree, every branch, every leaf was rendered in flawless detail on the water's surface. But something about it was wrong. It took me a moment to realize what. The reflection was inverted. Not upside down, that would be normal. Inverted. The trees on the north shore appeared in the reflection on the south side. The sky was below the trees, not above them. It was like looking at a photograph of the forest turned inside out. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still inverted. Still wrong. Maybe it was some optical illusion, some trick of light and water I'd never encountered. I'd taken geology courses, read about mountain lakes and their strange properties, but this didn't fit anything I knew. I reached out to touch the water. The moment my fingers broke the surface, I felt it. Cold. Much colder than it should be. October in Massachusetts, sure, the water would be cold. But this was ice water cold. The kind of cold that makes your bones ache. And the texture was wrong. Thicker than water should be, almost viscous, like touching very thin oil. I pulled my hand back quickly and wiped it on my pants. The water left no residue, no feeling, but my hand was numb with cold. And that's when I saw it move. The reflection. My reflection. It had moved, not at the same time I did. A split second after. Like a delay in a video feed, but this was water. This was physics. This was supposed to be instantaneous. I stepped back from the shore and stared at my reflection. It stared back. I raised my right hand. The reflection raised its left hand. That was normal. Mirrors reversed things. But then the reflection lowered its hand while mine was still raised. I dropped my hand immediately. The reflection did the same, but again, that tiny delay. A heartbeat behind. I was breathing faster now, my scientific mind trying to find explanations while some older, more primitive part of my brain was screaming at me to run. I didn't run. I never run. That's what got me into trouble in the first place. I walked around the lake, keeping my distance from the water, studying it from different angles. The same perfect stillness. The same inverted reflection. The same sense of wrongness that made my skin crawl. On the far side of the lake, I found something that made my blood run even colder. A sign. Old, wooden, weathered almost to illegibility. But I could still make out the carved letters. Felton Lake, no swimming, St. 1923. Over 60 years old. This lake had been here for at least 60 years, probably longer, and somehow it wasn't on any modern map. How does a 200-yard lake just disappear from records? I took photographs, dozens of them. The lake, the sign, the inverted reflection. Evidence that this place existed, that I wasn't losing my mind. The camera never lies, right? As I was packing up my camera, I heard something, a sound from across the lake. A splash, small, but distinct. I looked up. The water's surface was perfectly still again. No ripples spreading out from wherever the splash had originated. Impossible. Physics doesn't work that way. And in the reflection, I saw someone standing on the opposite shore. Me. I was looking at myself across the lake. But I was on this shore. I was right here. I wasn't over there. I waved my hand. The figure across the lake didn't move. I took a step to the side. The figure remained stationary. I was looking at myself, but a self that wasn't following my movements, wasn't connected to my actions. Then the figure raised its hand, not waving, pointing at me. I grabbed my gear and got out of there. Didn't run, but didn't waste time either. I hiked back to the main trail as fast as I could without actually panicking. My heart was hammering, my breath coming short, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, being studied. By the time I made it back to my truck, the sun was starting to set. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Optical illusions, fatigue, stress. My divorce had been hard. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. But I had the photographs, physical evidence. That would prove I wasn't crazy. I drove back to the ranger station, a small complex of buildings near the forest entrance. Jane was still there, filling out paperwork in the main office. She looked up when I came in. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Michael. What happened out there?" I sat down across from her desk. "That lake, something's wrong with it." "Wrong how?" "The reflection, it's inverted. And the water, it's not normal. Too still, too cold, wrong texture." Jane studied my face. "You feeling okay? Maybe you should take a few days off. You've been working a lot of shifts." "I'm fine. I just need you to look at something." I pulled out my camera and turned it on, pulling up the photos I'd taken. The screen showed trees, forest, no lake, no water, no inverted reflection. I clicked through the images frantically. Every single photograph showed the same thing: dense forest. Nothing but trees and undergrowth. "Michael, they were there. I saw them. I took dozens of pictures of the lake, the sign, everything." "I believe that you believe that," Jane said carefully. "But maybe you should go home. Get some rest. Come back tomorrow and we'll go check it out together, okay?" I didn't argue. I took my camera and went home to my cabin. I spent the entire night going through those photos, zooming in, adjusting contrast, looking for any evidence of the lake. Nothing. The camera showed only forest. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew that lake was there. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that reflection. Saw myself standing on the opposite shore, pointing at me. I saw the delay in the reflected movements, the wrong inversion, the impossible stillness. And I kept thinking about that sign. 1923. Over 60 years of existence completely erased from modern records. What else had been erased? What else didn't we know about October Mountain? The next morning, I went back. I had to. Jane thought I was losing it. My camera said I was wrong, but I knew what I'd seen. I took the same trail, followed the same fork, pushed through the same dense undergrowth. The clearing was there. The lake was there. And this time, I wasn't alone. Standing at the water's edge was another ranger. Older, maybe 60, wearing a uniform that looked like it was from the 1970s. He was staring into the water, motionless, like a statue. "Hey," I called out. "Excuse me." He didn't respond, didn't move. I approached carefully, one hand on my radio. "Sir, are you all right?" As I got closer, I could see his face. It was slack, expressionless, eyes open, but unseeing. He was breathing, barely, but he didn't acknowledge my presence at all. I looked into the water where he was staring. In the reflection, the man was moving. The reflected version of him was looking around, waving his arms, clearly agitated. His mouth was open like he was shouting, but no sound came from the real man standing beside me. I grabbed the man's shoulder and shook him. "Hey, can you hear me?" He collapsed, just dropped like someone had cut his strings. I caught him as he fell, lowered him to the ground. His pulse was weak, thready. His skin was ice cold. I called for emergency services, gave them my coordinates, started CPR even though he was technically breathing. The whole time I kept glancing at the lake, at the reflection. The reflected version of the man was gone. The water showed only the inverted forest, still and wrong and watching. The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later. They couldn't revive him. He was dead before they even loaded him into the ambulance. Hypothermia, they said. His core body temperature was 82 degrees, like he'd been submerged in freezing water for hours. But his clothes were dry. His skin was dry. He hadn't been in the water at all. They asked me if I knew who he was. I didn't. They'd have to identify him from his uniform and badges. But as they were loading him into the ambulance, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. His name tag, visible now that they'd shifted his body. Coleman, R. Coleman, the ranger who'd disappeared in 1962, the one from the archives, the one whose final log entry had read, "The lake knows me now." He'd been missing for 27 years, and he'd died standing at the edge of a lake that officially didn't exist, staring at a reflection that moved independently of his body. I stood there in the clearing long after the ambulance left, staring at the water, at my reflection, at the inverted world that looked more real than the one I was standing in. And for the first time I had a terrifying thought. What if the reflection wasn't a reflection at all? What if that was the real world, and this, everything I'd known my entire life, was the reflection? What if we were looking at reality backward, and something down there in the true world was looking back at us? I stepped closer to the water's edge, close enough to see my reflection clearly, close enough to see it looking back at me, and this time I saw it clearly. My reflection blinked. I didn't. It blinked when I didn't blink. I turned and ran. This time, I didn't walk. I ran. I crashed through the forest, branches tearing at my uniform, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, and even then, I sat there with the doors locked, engine running, staring at the rearview mirror, staring at my own eyes, wondering if they were mine at all. I didn't go back to the lake for 3 days. I told myself I was being professional, giving the authorities time to investigate Coleman's death, letting the shock wear off. But the truth was simpler. I was terrified. Coleman had been missing since 1962, 27 years, and he'd died at that lake, staring at his own reflection. A reflection that had moved independently, lived independently while his real body stood frozen on the shore. The official report said hypothermia. Exposure. They found him in the woods, they said, not near any water. I didn't correct them. Who would believe me? I'd tried to show Jane photographs of the lake, and the camera had shown only trees. I had no evidence except my own eyes, and my own eyes were starting to make me question everything. On the third night, I dreamed about the lake. I was standing at its edge, looking at my reflection. But in the dream, the reflection was living my life. It was walking through my cabin, sleeping in my bed, drinking from my coffee mug, and I was in the water, watching, unable to move, unable to scream. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. My left hand was numb with cold, like I'd plunged it into ice water. I stared at it in the darkness, flexing the fingers until feeling returned. That's when I noticed the scar. I've had a scar on my left hand since I was 12. A long white line across the palm from a fishing accident. 3 inches long, slightly raised. I knew that scar better than I knew my own face. It was on the wrong hand. I turned on the light and stared at both palms. The scar was on my right hand now, 3 inches long, slightly raised, exactly the same, but it had always been on my left hand. Always. I had 30 years of memories of that scar being on my left hand. I checked my wedding ring finger. I'd taken off my ring after the divorce 3 years ago. The indentation was still there, barely visible, on my left hand. But I was left-handed. I'd worn my ring on my right hand. Everyone wore rings on their left hand, but I was left-handed, so I'd worn mine on the right. Except I remembered wearing it on my left. I remembered the weight of it on my left ring finger. 2 sets of memories, both feeling real, both impossible. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I went to the station archives. If I was losing my mind, I wanted proof. I wanted to see Coleman's file, wanted to understand what had happened to him. Jane let me into the archive room, a dusty space in the basement filled with filing cabinets and boxes dating back to the 1930s. Personnel files, incident reports, ranger logs, all the boring bureaucracy of forest management. I found Coleman's file easily enough. Robert Coleman, ranger from 1958 to 1962. The file was thin. A few performance reviews, some incident reports, nothing unusual. Until I reached his final entries. His last log was dated October 15, 1962. It read, "Found unusual geological formation off Felton Trail. Will investigate further. Requesting surveying equipment from county office." The next entry, October 17th, "Surveying equipment delayed. Conducted preliminary investigation of site. Water sample collected. Highly unusual properties. Recommend immediate hydrological study." October 20th, "Water sample sent to state lab. Results pending. Site remains unmarked on official maps. Discrepancy needs addressing." October 22nd, "Lab results inconclusive. Water composition normal, but isotope ratios are impossible. Lab requesting new sample. Believes contamination of first sample." October 25th, "Return to site for second sample. Water surface exhibiting unusual reflective properties. Optical illusion. Will document with photographs." October 27th, "Photographs failed to develop properly. All images show forest only. Cannot capture lake on film. Beginning to suspect surveying error in original discovery." October 29th, "Lake definitely present. Multiple visual confirmations, but photographs continue to fail. Equipment malfunction or something else." October 31st, 1962. The final entry, written in shaking handwriting. "The lake knows me now. I see myself in the water, but it's not a reflection. It's watching me. It's learning from me. The water wants to understand what I am, and I can feel it studying me. Every time I look at the surface, I lose a little more of myself. The reflection knows things I haven't thought yet." Last night, I dreamed I was underwater, looking up at myself standing on the shore. When I woke up, I was dry, but I could taste the water in my mouth. I'm requesting transfer. I can't come back to this lake. If I do, I don't think I'll leave. That was the last entry. Coleman disappeared the next day. November 1st, 1962. His truck was found at the ranger station. His cabin was locked from the inside. No signs of struggle, no note, nothing. He just vanished. And 27 years later, he died at the edge of the lake, staring at a reflection that had lived independently for nearly 3 decades. I sat in the archive room for a long time, reading and rereading Coleman's entries. The parallels were too precise to ignore. The lake that cameras couldn't capture, the independent reflection, the feeling of being studied. The lake knows me now. I pulled out my phone and called the state lab, the same one Coleman had used. After being transferred 3 times, I reached someone in the Geological Survey Division. "I'm calling about water samples sent in 1962, I said. "From October Mountain State Forest. Ranger Robert Coleman." A pause. The sound of typing. "Yes, we have those records. The samples were flagged as anomalous. Isotope ratios inconsistent with local water sources. We requested additional samples, but none were provided." What made the isotope ratios anomalous? The water appeared to be temporally inconsistent. "I don't understand." Another pause. "The isotopes suggested the water was both very old and very young simultaneously. Billions of years and only days. It was impossible, obviously. We assumed contamination or equipment failure." "Why are you asking about 60-year-old samples?" "I think I found the same lake." "Well, if you get samples, we'd be very interested. That case was never resolved. It's still flagged in our system as an open scientific anomaly." I hung up and stared at Coleman's file. An open anomaly. The lake had been a mystery in 1962, and it was still a mystery now. How many other rangers had found it? How many others had stared at their reflections until the reflection stared back? That afternoon, I drove back to Felton Trail. I told myself I was just checking on the site, making sure it was secure after Coleman's death. But I knew the truth. The lake was calling me. I could feel it in my bones, a pull I couldn't explain or resist. The fork in the trail was still there. The path through the dense forest. And at the end, the clearing. The lake. Perfectly still. Perfectly inverted. Perfectly wrong. I stood at the shore and stared at my reflection. It stared back. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I raised my right hand. The reflection raised its left hand. Normal mirror behavior. Then it smiled. I wasn't smiling. I felt my face. My expression was neutral, maybe a little fearful. But in the water, my reflection was smiling. Not a friendly smile. A knowing smile. Like it understood something I didn't. I stepped back from the shore and pulled out a notebook. I wrote, October 15th, 1989. Michael Torres, the reflection acts independently. I held up the notebook so the reflection could see it. The reflected notebook was readable, the mirror image text somehow inverting itself to be legible. And as I watched, the reflected me pulled out a notebook too and wrote something. I couldn't read it from here. The text was too small. But the reflection was holding up its notebook, showing me. I took a step closer to the water. Another step. Close enough now to read the reflected writing. I'm the real one. My hands started shaking. I looked up from the notebook to the reflection's face. It was still smiling. No, I said out loud. I'm standing here. I'm real. You're just a reflection. The reflected me shook its head. It pointed at me, then pointed down at the water. Then it pointed at itself and gestured upward at the sky. It was trying to tell me something. Something I didn't want to understand. I turned and walked away from the lake, back through the forest, back to the trail. But as I walked, I felt something wrong with my body. A disconnect, like I was piloting myself from a distance. My left hand felt strange. My footsteps didn't sound quite right. When I got back to my truck, I looked at my hands again. The scar was on my left hand now. I was sure it had been on my right hand this morning. But no, it had always been on my left. Hadn't it? I drove back to the cabin in a daze. Inside, everything looked the same. My books, my furniture, my life. But something felt off, like I was looking at a photograph of my cabin rather than the actual place. I looked in the bathroom mirror. My face looked back at me, same face I'd always had. Dark eyes, graying hair at the temples, the small mole on my right cheek, except the mole was on my left cheek now. I touched it. Solid, real, but I remembered it being on my right cheek. 30 years of shaving around that mole, being careful not to cut it. On my right cheek, I pulled up my sleeve. I had a birthmark on my right forearm, a dark spot about the size of a dime. It was there, right where it should be, except it should be on my left forearm. I remembered being teased about it as a kid. The teacher checking for answers written on my left forearm because of the birthmark. Right arm, left arm. Both memories felt real. I was losing my grip on which version of myself was original. The lake was bleeding into my reality, switching small details, making me question everything. That night, I had the dream again. I was underwater, looking up at myself on the shore. But this time, I could breathe. The water wasn't water anymore. It was something else, something thicker, more substantial, more real. And I could see clearly now, see myself standing on the shore, looking down at me. See the world above, the inverted world, the reflected world. And I understood, with a clarity that felt like madness, that the water was right. The reflected world in the lake was the real one, always had been. Our world, the one I'd lived in for 42 years, was the reflection. We were the copies, living in the mirror image of true reality. And the lake was the only place where the true world bled through, where you could see the real from the reflected. I woke up with water in my lungs. I was in my bed, dry, but I was coughing up water. Clear, cold, that same wrong texture I'd felt when I touched the lake. I coughed and choked until I'd expelled it all, then sat there gasping, my chest burning. On my nightstand there was a wet footprint. A boot print, the same pattern as my ranger boots. But I was in bed. I hadn't walked there. Someone else had. Something else. The reflection. I got dressed and drove to the lake. It was 3 a.m, but I didn't care. I had to know, had to understand what was happening to me. The forest was dark, my flashlight beam barely penetrating the undergrowth. But I knew the way now. Could probably walk it in my sleep. Maybe I had walked it in my sleep. The lake was there, glowing faintly in the moonlight. And standing at the shore with its back to me was a figure. Me. I watched myself standing at the water's edge, staring down at the surface. I couldn't see what the other me was seeing, but I could guess it was looking down at me, at this me, the one standing in the forest. I cleared my throat. The figure turned around. We stared at each other. 2 Michael Torres, identical in every way, standing on opposite sides of the shore. "Which one are you?" I asked. "The real one," it said. My voice, but slightly different, like hearing yourself on a recording. "How do I know you're not the reflection?" It smiled, that same knowing smile I'd seen in the water. "How do you know you're not?" I couldn't answer that. Couldn't argue with the logic. If the reflection could become real enough to stand on the shore, to leave footprints in my cabin, then which of us was the original? Which one had started in the real world and which one had climbed out of the lake? "What do you want?" I asked. "To understand. To exist fully. Right now, I'm split between 2 realities. Part of me is in the real world down there. It pointed at the water. Part of me is up here, in the reflection. I need to be whole again. How? One of us has to go back to where we belong. The reflection goes back to being a reflection. The real one stays real. And which one is which? It stepped closer, close enough now that I could see every detail, the scar on the left hand, the mole on the left cheek, the birthmark on the right forearm. Everything exactly where I remembered it being. You tell me, it said. Do you feel real? Or do you feel like you're watching yourself from the outside? Like you're piloting a body that isn't quite yours? I did feel that way. I'd felt it since the first time I touched the lake water. Like I was slightly disconnected from myself. The lake is teaching us, it continued. Teaching us what we really are. Reflections of the true world. Living in an inverted reality. And once you understand that, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to believing you're real. I am real, I said, but my voice was weak, uncertain. Then prove it. Jump in the water. If you're real, you'll surface. If you're the reflection, it gestured at the lake. You'll return to where you belong. I stared at the water. The surface was perfectly still, perfectly reflective, and in that reflection, I could see the true world, the real forest, the real sky, the real me. Maybe I had been living backward my entire life. Maybe the only real thing I'd ever seen was that lake, that perfect inverted window into the world as it actually was. I took a step toward the water, then stopped, because I saw something else in the reflection. Not the forest, not the sky. Something deeper, something below the surface, a darkness that had no shape, no form, just an absence of light so complete it hurt to look at. And I realized the other me was lying. This wasn't about real versus reflection. This was about something else. Something that lived in the lake, in the space between realities, in the inversion itself. Something that wanted to cross over, to replace me, to become me. I turned and ran, again, just like before. And behind me, I heard my own voice calling out, "You can't run from yourself, Michael. You can't escape what you are. Eventually, you'll have to look in the water, and when you do, you'll understand." I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, but as I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The reflection looking back at me wasn't mine. It was smiling. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the water rising around me, felt myself sinking into that perfect stillness. And every time I looked in a mirror, I saw it. The smile, the knowing expression that wasn't quite mine. I was losing time too. Hours would disappear. I'd be at my desk, filling out paperwork, and suddenly it would be dark outside and I couldn't remember the afternoon. I'd find mud on my boots, lake water dried into the treads, with no memory of going there. On the 3rd day, I called in sick and drove to the university library in Amherst. If this was happening to me, it had probably happened to others. There had to be records, accounts, something that could help me understand. I spent 8 hours in the archives going through old newspapers, historical society records, anything related to October Mountain. And I found them, the stories. A geological expedition to survey the mountain lakes. The team included a young writer named Howard Phillips, who was visiting from Providence. They documented finding an anomalous body of water with properties inconsistent with known physical laws. Howard Phillips wrote in his journal, "I have seen the truth of our existence, and it is more terrible than I imagined. We are not the world we believe ourselves to be. We are the reflection of a world we cannot perceive, living in inverted reality. And there are things that live in the true world, things that have learned to reach across the barrier." Howard Phillips. HP. I felt a chill run down my spine. H.P. Lovecraft, one of the most famous horror writers in American history, and he'd been to this lake in 1923. I kept reading. Lovecraft never published anything specifically about the lake, but his later stories were filled with themes of inverted reality, of worlds existing parallel to our own, of ancient entities that existed outside normal space. The mountains of madness, the color out of space, the thing at the threshold. He'd been trying to tell people, wrapped in fiction, disguised as fantasy but trying to warn them about what he'd seen in that lake. I found more, 1847. A surveyor's report mentioned a looking-glass pond that caused disorientation and melancholy in all who viewed it. The surveyor recommended the area be avoided and marked as unsafe for settlement. A British soldier's diary written during the Revolution. He'd gotten separated from his unit in the Berkshire Mountains and found a lake where the world was shown in its true form, upside down and backward, and I saw myself as I really am, a phantom living in a phantom world. The lake had been there for centuries, maybe forever, and everyone who found it saw the same thing, the inversion, the truth. And most of them went mad trying to reconcile it with the reality they'd always known. But Coleman had survived for 27 years. He'd found the lake, been trapped in it somehow, and lived in that state for nearly 3 decades. How? What had he understood that the others hadn't? I went back to the ranger station that evening. Jane was closing up, looking exhausted. She'd been covering my shifts along with her own. "Michael, you look terrible. Are you okay? I need to ask you something. Did Coleman ever talk about the lake before he disappeared?" She frowned. "Coleman? The ranger from the 60s? Michael, I wasn't even born yet. How would I know?" "No, I mean, weren't there records? Stories from other rangers? Why are you obsessing over this? It's not healthy." "Because I think I'm next. I think whatever happened to him is happening to me." Jane had down heavily. "Okay, talk to me. What's going on?" I told her everything. The lake, the reflection, the other me, the time I couldn't remember, the details that kept changing. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to worry to something that looked like pity. "Michael," she said finally, "I think you need to see someone, a professional. This level of stress, the paranoia, the memory issues, it could be a breakdown. After the divorce, all the overtime, living alone in the woods, I'm not having a breakdown. The lake is real. Coleman found it. Lovecraft found it. I found it." "Lovecraft? The writer?" "Michael, he wrote fiction, horror stories. They weren't documentaries. They were warnings." Jane stood up. "I'm going to call Dr. Brennan. She's a good therapist, works with first responders. She's helped a lot of people. I don't need a therapist. I need someone to believe me. I want to believe you, but you're asking me to accept that there's a lake that doesn't show up on cameras, where reflections come to life, and that H.P. Lovecraft discovered it and wrote coded warnings about it. Do you hear how that sounds?" I did hear it. It sounded insane, but it was true. All of it was true. I left the station and drove back to my cabin. Inside, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back was mine, but wrong. The eyes were too knowing, the smile too confident. "I know you can hear me," I said to the reflection. "Whatever you are, whatever you want. I'm not letting you take my place." The reflection tilted its head. Then it spoke, and its voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "I'm not taking your place, Michael. I am your place. I'm what you've always been. You're just finally seeing clearly. You're a reflection, that's all. Light bouncing off water. And what are you? Atoms arranged in a pattern, electrical signals in a brain, a temporary configuration of matter that will dissolve and return to the earth in a few decades. You're no more real than I am. We're both just patterns. The only difference is which side of the glass we're on. I punched the mirror. It shattered, glass cutting my hand. Blood ran down my wrist. Real blood, real pain, real, but in the broken shards I could still see it. The reflection. Fragmented now, but still there. Still smiling. I bandaged my hand and grabbed my car keys. I was going to end this. I was going to go to the lake and destroy it, fill it in, blow it up if I had to. Whatever it took to stop the inversion. The drive to October Mountain was a blur. I didn't remember most of it. One moment I was leaving my cabin, the next I was parking at the trailhead. Another chunk of missing time. I hiked to the lake in darkness, my flashlight beam dancing across the trees. The path felt familiar now, like I'd walked it 1,000 times. Maybe I had. Maybe I'd been walking it in my sleep, drawn to the water night after night. The lake was there, waiting, glowing faintly in the moonlight. And standing at the shore were others. Rangers? 6 of them, maybe 7. Different uniforms from different eras. One from the 1940s, one from the 1960s, Coleman, one from the 1970s, more recent ones. All standing perfectly still, staring at the water. I approached slowly. Hello? None of them moved. They were like statues, frozen in place. I walked up to the nearest one, a woman in a 1980s uniform. I touched her shoulder. Her skin was cold. Not dead cold, but not alive either. Something in between. "She's waiting," a voice said behind me. I spun around. It was me, the other me, standing there in ranger uniform, perfectly calm. Who's waiting? The thing in the lake, the thing that exists between realities. It's been studying us, learning from us. Every time someone looks in the water, it learns a little more about what it means to be human. And when it's learned enough, the other me gestured at the frozen rangers. It creates a perfect copy, a version of you that can exist in both realities simultaneously, half in the true world, half in the reflection. Why? Because it wants to cross over. It's been trapped in the inversion for eons, watching our world through the lake's surface. And it's finally figured out how. By becoming us. By creating bridges, perfect human copies that belong to both worlds. Once there are enough of us, enough bridges, it can finally cross over completely. I looked at the frozen rangers. So these are all copies? All bridges? They were. Now they're just empty. The thing already used them, drained them. It's learning from each one, getting better at creating copies. And you're next. Why are you telling me this? If you're one of its copies, why warn me? The other me smiled. Because I'm not just a copy anymore. I'm learning too. Learning to be more than just a bridge. And I think I'm starting to become real. Really real. Not just a reflection. Then help me stop it. I can't stop it. No one can. It's been here longer than humans have existed. Longer than this planet has existed. It exists outside of time, outside of space. It just is. I felt despair settling over me. If this thing was that powerful, that ancient, what chance did I have? But then I remembered something Coleman had written. The lake knows me now. Not the thing in the lake, or the entity. The lake itself. The water. It's the water, I said. The lake isn't just where it lives. The lake is what it is. The water itself is the entity. The other me nodded slowly. The water is the medium. The boundary between realities. And yes, the entity is the water. It's a living boundary, conscious and aware. It's been watching both worlds since the beginning, learning, waiting. Can it be destroyed? How do you destroy water? How do you destroy the boundary between realities? I didn't have an answer, but I had to try something. I pulled out a road flare from my pack, the kind we kept for emergencies. If I couldn't destroy the water, maybe I could at least contaminate it, make it uninhabitable for whatever was living there. I lit the flare and threw it into the lake. The effect was instantaneous. The water erupted, waves spreading out from where the flare hit. The frozen rangers all jerked to life at once, screaming, clutching their heads. The other me stumbled backward, its face twisting in pain, and I felt it too. A searing agony in my mind, like my brain was being torn in half, because I was connected to the lake now. Part of me was already in the water, already inverted, already becoming one of its bridges. The flare sank, its red light visible beneath the surface, and the water around it began to change, to cloud, to die. But something else was rising, something from the depths of the lake, from the true reality beneath our reflection, a darkness, a shape, an entity of impossible geometry and terrible awareness. It broke the surface, and I understood, finally, what Coleman had meant. The lake knows me now, because I could see it, see the thing that lived between realities, see it in its true form, undisguised by water or reflection. And seeing it meant it had seen me, meant I was known, meant I could never unknow what I now knew. The frozen rangers were collapsing, one by one, their bodies crumbling like sand. They'd been empty vessels, and now even that structure was falling apart. The other me was changing too. Its face was shifting, becoming something not quite human. The copy was breaking down, the bridge dissolving. And I was changing. I could feel it. My sense of self splitting, dividing, one part staying on the shore, another part sinking into the water, into the true reality. I had a choice. I could fight it, try to hold on to this reality, this life. Or I could let go. Let myself become inverted. Let the reflection become the real. The entity was still rising, still emerging, and I realized this was what it wanted. For me to choose. For me to willingly cross over. Because forced transformation was imperfect, but willing transformation, that created a perfect bridge. I looked at the other me, now barely recognizable as human. "If I go in," I shouted over the roaring water, "if I let it take me, what happens to you?" "I become real," it said, its voice distorted. "I take your place completely. Live your life. Be Michael Torres. And I become the reflection. You become part of it, part of the entity, part of the boundary itself." I looked at the lake, at the thing rising from it, at the frozen rangers dissolving into nothing, and I made my choice. I jumped into the water. The cold was absolute, the pressure immediate. I sank quickly, the surface receding above me, and as I descended, I felt myself dissolving, becoming one with the water, with the entity, with the boundary between realities. But I also felt understanding, clarity, the truth of what I was, what we all were. We were reflections of reflections. Reality folded in on itself infinitely, each layer reflecting the layer above and below, and the entity wasn't trying to cross over. It was trying to show us that we were already part of it, had always been part of it. The boundary between realities wasn't a line, it was consciousness itself. And as I sank deeper, I realized I wasn't dying. I was becoming something more than Michael Torres, something that existed in all realities simultaneously. I opened my eyes underwater and saw everything, every version of myself that had ever been or could ever be, every choice I'd made or could make, every reality stacked on top of each other like pages in a book, and in all of them I was looking up at a figure standing on the shore, looking up at myself, at Michael Torres, Ranger, at the man I used to be, at the man who was still me, and also wasn't me at all. The water pulled me deeper, and I let it, because I finally understood. There was no escaping the lake. There was only becoming it. I woke up on the shore of the lake, coughing water from my lungs. My body was freezing, my uniform soaked through, and every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. Above me, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too vivid, too saturated, like I was seeing color for the first time. I sat up slowly, every muscle aching with a deep cold that went beyond physical temperature. It was the cold of existing in two places at once, of being stretched across realities like taffy pulled too thin. The lake was calm again, perfectly still, perfectly reflective, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't jumped into its depths and dissolved into the entity that lived between worlds. The other rangers were gone, the frozen bodies from different eras, the dissolving forms, the copies and reflections and bridges between realities, all of them vanished like morning mist. Only me remained. Only Michael Torres. Or was I? I stood up on shaking legs and looked down at myself. My ranger uniform was soaked, water dripping from every fold and seam. But the water wasn't cold anymore. It was body temperature, as if it had become part of me, indistinguishable from my own blood and sweat. I walked to the water's edge and stared at my reflection. For a long moment we looked at each other, the me on the shore and the me in the water. Then, simultaneously, we both raised our right hands to our faces, touching our cheeks in the exact same motion, at the exact same moment. No delay, no independence. We were synchronized again, one entity existing in two places. But which place was real? I looked at my hands. They were mine, the calluses from years of trail work, the small scars from brambles and tools, the scar on my left palm from that fishing accident when I was 12. Everything was where it should be, where I remembered it being, but I also remembered the scar being on my right hand. I remembered wearing my wedding ring on my right hand because I was left-handed. I remembered my birthmark being on my left forearm, not my right. Two sets of memories existed in my head now, both feeling equally real, equally true. The memories of the original Michael Torres and the memories of his reflection, and I couldn't tell which set belonged to me. I pulled out my wallet with trembling hands. Inside was my Ranger ID card with my photograph. I studied the picture. It was definitely me. Same face, same slight asymmetry in my smile, same small mole on my left cheek. But I could swear that mole used to be on my right cheek. I turned the ID over and over in my hands, trying to find some anchor point, some undeniable proof of which reality I belonged to. But the more I looked, the less certain I became. The photograph could be from either timeline. The name Michael Torres could belong to either version of me. The entity in the lake had shown me the truth. We are all reflections of reflections. Reality folding in on itself infinitely. There was no original Michael Torres, just countless versions across countless realities, all equally valid, all equally illusory. I put the wallet away and looked around the clearing. The forest looked the same as it always had. The old oak trees, the mountain laurel, the ferns carpeting the forest floor. But something felt different. The quality of light, maybe, or the way sound traveled through the air. Everything was subtly wrong, like a photograph that's been slightly oversaturated. I needed to leave. Needed to get back to my truck, back to the station, back to some semblance of normal life, even if I didn't know which version of normal I was returning to. The hike back to the trail was disorienting. The path seemed both familiar and strange, like walking through a place I'd seen in dreams. Twice, I took wrong turns that shouldn't have existed, finding myself in parts of the forest I didn't recognize before the path corrected itself and led me back to familiar territory. When I finally reached my truck, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The face looked back at me with my own eyes, dark brown, slightly bloodshot from lack of sleep and the trauma of dissolution and reformation. Michael Torres, 42 years old. Park ranger at October Mountain State Forest. But the longer I stared, the more I saw the subtle differences. The way the light caught my features, the slight unfamiliarity in my own expression. Was I looking at myself, or at a perfect copy that had climbed out of the water while the real me drowned? I started the engine and drove back toward the ranger station, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. The drive felt endless, each turn of the road presenting me with small discrepancies. A tree that I didn't remember being there, a guardrail that seemed too new, a road sign that read Washington 5 miles, when I could have sworn it used to say Lenox 5 miles. Or maybe I was remembering wrong. Maybe this had always been the correct road, the correct signs, the correct reality. Maybe my memories were the anomaly, not the world around me. By the time I reached the station, I'd counted 17 small differences from what I remembered. 17 tiny fractures in the fabric of my known reality. 17 pieces of evidence that I might not be in my original world. Or 17 pieces of evidence that I was going insane. Jane was at the station when I walked in, and her reaction told me everything. She looked up from her desk, and her expression shifted from concentration to shock to something that looked almost like fear. "Michael?" Her voice was uncertain, questioning, as if she wasn't sure I was really who I appeared to be. "My God, you look... Where have you been? You've been missing for 3 days." 3 days, time was still fractured, still inconsistent. I'd experienced one long night at the lake, but the world had moved forward without me. Or I'd moved forward without the world, or something. "I was dealing with the lake," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. Deeper than I remembered, or maybe exactly the same, and I was just hearing it differently now. Jane stood up slowly, studying me with concern. "You look different, Michael. I can't explain it. Like you're more here, more present, but also..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense. Are you okay? Do you need to see a doctor?" More here, more present. Because I was more real now? Or because the reflection had solidified, become substantial enough to fool even people who knew the original? "I'm fine," I lied. "I just need to file a report and then go home. Get some rest." "About the lake?" "Michael, you've been obsessing over this. Maybe you should..." "It's resolved," I interrupted. "The situation at the lake is resolved. I just need to document what happened." Jane looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She nodded slowly and sat back down, her eyes never leaving my face, watching me like she was trying to solve a puzzle, trying to figure out what was different about me. I spent the next hour at my desk, trying to write a coherent report about what had happened at Felton Lake. But how do you document reality inversion? How do you explain that you jumped into a lake and dissolved into a cosmic entity, then reconstituted yourself on the shore? How do you tell your supervisor that you don't know if you're the real you, or reflection that became real. In the end, I wrote something vague and technical. Investigated anomalous body of water off Felton Trail. Site poses potential safety hazard due to unusual environmental factors. Recommend cordoning area and marking as off-limits to recreational use pending further geological survey. It was inadequate. It was a lie. But it was all I could put into official language. I filed the report and drove home to my cabin. Inside, everything looked the same. My books, my furniture, my coffee mug still sitting on the counter where I'd left it 3 days ago. But it all felt slightly wrong, like furniture arranged by someone who'd only seen photographs of the room. The spatial relationships were correct, but the feeling was off. I walked through the cabin, touching things, trying to trigger some sense of familiarity, some proof that this was my home and I was the rightful inhabitant. My hand brushed the spines of books I'd read dozens of times. I picked up the coffee mug and smelled the stale coffee residue. I sat in my favorite chair and felt the familiar impression my body had made in the cushions over years of use. Everything was right, and everything was wrong. In the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror. The glass had a thin crack running through it. I remembered punching it in frustration, shattering it. But the crack was small, hairline, not the spiderweb of fractures I remembered creating. Had I punched it less hard than I thought? Or was this a different mirror in a different timeline? I pulled off my shirt and examined my torso. Every scar was where it should be. The appendectomy scar from when I was 19. The burn mark from a camping accident when I was 25. The ragged line across my ribs from the car accident that had killed my college roommate. I knew these scars, knew the stories behind each one. But I also had memories of slightly different scars. A longer appendectomy scar. A burn on the opposite side. No car accident because in that timeline I'd stayed home that night instead of getting in the car. I was a palimpsest, a manuscript written over itself multiple times. Each layer of text still faintly visible beneath the others. I contained multitudes, multiple versions of myself existing simultaneously in one body. The question was whether that body was real or reflected. I got into bed that night but couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the water rising around me, felt myself dissolving into the boundary between realities. I was both in the bed and in the lake, both breathing air and breathing water, both Michael Torres the ranger and Michael Torres the entity. Around 3 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep. I got dressed, grabbed a flashlight and my notebook, and drove back to the lake. I had to see it again. Had to try to understand what I'd become. The hike through the dark forest felt like walking through a memory. My feet knew the path without my conscious mind directing them. The trees seemed to lean in, watching, recognizing me as something that belonged to them now. Something that was part of the forest in a way I hadn't been before. When I reached the clearing, the lake was there, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The surface was perfectly still, as always, and in that perfect stillness I could see both worlds, the reflected forest above and the true forest below. Both equally real, both equally illusory. I walked to the shore and knelt down, careful not to touch the water. Close enough to see my reflection clearly, but not close enough to trigger another dissolution. My reflection looked back at me, and this time I could see it clearly, the subtle differences. The reflection's eyes were slightly wider, more aware. Its expression held knowledge that my face didn't. It knew things I didn't know, or hadn't admitted to myself yet. "Are you me?" I asked the reflection. It didn't answer with words, but I felt the response in my mind. A knowing that bypassed language. Yes and no, both and neither. The reflection was me, and I was the reflection, and we were both aspects of something larger that existed in the space between. I pulled out my notebook and started writing. If I couldn't trust my own memories, at least I could document what was happening now. Create a record that might help the next person who found this place. October 23rd, 1989. Michael Torres. 3 days since I jumped into the lake, or since I climbed out. The distinction no longer seems meaningful. I don't know if I'm the original Michael Torres or the reflected one. The memories are contradictory, the physical evidence is ambiguous. I am both versions simultaneously collapsed into a single existence by the act of observation. The entity in the lake, I understand it now. It's not trying to cross over into our reality. It already exists in our reality, and in every other reality. It is reality, or at least the substrate that reality is written on. The lake is just one of the few places where the substrate is visible, where you can see the mechanism beneath the illusion. Coleman spent 27 years existing in both places at once. Part of him on the shore, part of him in the water, unable to fully commit to either reality. Maybe that's my fate too. Maybe I'll spend the rest of my life uncertain, trapped between two versions of myself. But I don't think that's the worst fate. The worst fate would be certainty, being so convinced of your own reality that you never question it, never see the truth. At least I know I'm a reflection now. At least I've seen what I really am. I closed the notebook and stood up. As I did, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, hand instinctively moving towards the flashlight I could use as a weapon. Standing at the edge of the clearing was another ranger. Young, maybe 30, with dark hair and a lean build. He was wearing a ranger uniform that looked current, modern. His name tag caught the moonlight. Torres, J. Torres, my heart stopped. I knew that name. Knew that face. Jacob. My son. But that was impossible. I didn't have a son. I'd been divorced for 3 years, and Ellen and I had never had children. We'd talked about it, planned for it, but the marriage had fallen apart before we'd gotten around to starting a family. Except, I also remembered Jacob, remembered him being born, remembered teaching him to fish, taking him camping, watching him graduate high school. The memories were there, vivid and clear, sitting alongside the memories of a childless marriage. 2 timelines, 2 sets of memories, 2 versions of my life, both equally real in my fractured mind. "Dad," Jacob said, his voice uncertain, "is that really you?" I didn't know how to answer. Was I his father? Or was I the version of Michael Torres from a reality where Jacob had never been born? Had the lake merged us together, creating a hybrid existence that contained memories from multiple timelines? "Jacob," I said carefully, "what are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing. Mom said you disappeared 3 years ago, said you went into the woods and never came back. We had a funeral. I gave a eulogy." His voice cracked. "And now here you are, looking exactly the same as the day you vanished. Not a day older. What the hell is going on?" 3 years. In his timeline, I'd been missing for 3 years. But in mine, I'd only jumped into the lake days ago. Time was more fractured than I'd realized. The lake didn't just exist outside of space. It existed outside of time, connecting different eras, different versions of history. "Come away from the water," I said. "It's not safe here." "I know it's not safe. That's why I came looking for you. I've spent 3 years researching this place, trying to understand what happened to you. I found Coleman's records, found the accounts from the 1920s about H.P. Lovecraft visiting an anomalous lake, found your notes in the ranger station archives." He pulled out a familiar notebook. My notebook, the one I'd been writing in just moments ago. Except it was weathered now, aged, 3 years of handling visible in the worn cover and dog-eared pages. You wrote about the inversion, Jacob continued, about being a reflection of a reflection, about not knowing which version of you was real. I thought maybe if I came here, if I could find the lake, I could understand what happened to you. Maybe even find a way to bring you back. Jacob, you need to leave. Looking into the lake, it changes you. It makes you question everything. You don't want that. Too late. He gestured at the water. I've been coming here for weeks, trying to understand it. And I've seen things. Seen my reflection acting independently. Seen other versions of myself in the water. Versions where you never left. Versions where Mom never divorced you. Versions where I never existed at all. He was already infected by the lake's knowledge. Already starting to fracture. I could see it in his eyes. That same uncertainty I felt. That same existential doubt about which reality was the correct one. There's something I need to tell you, I said. About what I am. About what I became when I jumped into the lake. I know what you became. You became part of it. Part of the boundary between realities. You exist in all of them simultaneously now, don't you? That's why you can be here, in my timeline, even though you've only been gone for days in yours. He understood more than I'd expected. More than I'd understood myself until just now. The lake had shown him the truth, just as it had shown me. If you know that, I said, then you know why you need to leave. If you stay, if you keep looking at your reflection, you'll end up like me, like Coleman, trapped between worlds, never fully present in any of them. Jacob shook his head. I don't want to leave. I want to understand, and more than that, I want to see if it's possible to save you, to pull you back into one reality completely, to make you whole again. I don't think I can be made whole. I think this is what I am now. Then maybe I need to become the same thing. Maybe that's the only way we can exist in the same reality again. The words hit me like a physical blow. He was willing to sacrifice his own solidity, his own certainty, just to be in the same existential state as me. It was the most profound expression of love I'd ever encountered, offering to become fractured so we could be fractured together. No, I said firmly, you're not doing this. You're going to walk away from this lake, go back to your life, remember me as someone who got lost in the woods. That's the story you tell. That's the reality you choose to believe. And what about you? What reality are you choosing? I looked at the lake, at my reflection looking back at me with knowing eyes. What reality was I choosing? Could I even choose? Or had the choice been made the moment I first touched the water? I'm choosing all of them, I said finally. All the realities at once, because I can't unknow what I know now. Can't unsee what I've seen. The lake showed me that we're all reflections, all versions of each other existing simultaneously across infinite possibilities. And once you understand that, you can't go back to believing in a single, solid reality. Then teach me, Jacob said. Show me what you've learned. If I do that, you'll lose yourself, lose your certainty about who you are. Maybe I need to lose that certainty. Maybe we all do. I thought about arguing further, but I could see the determination in his eyes. He'd already made his decision. And who was I to stop him from seeking the same truth I'd found? Who was I to deny him the knowledge that had transformed me? Okay, I said. But not by jumping in. That's too violent, too sudden. You'll dissolve completely, like I did. There's a gentler way. Coleman found it. That's how he survived for 27 years. I led Jacob to the shore of the lake, positioning us both so we could see our reflections clearly in the moonlight. "Look at your reflection," I instructed. "Really look at it. Not just the surface image, but deeper. Try to see the reality beneath the reflection, the truth beneath the appearance." Jacob stared at the water, his face intense with concentration. I watched his reflection and saw it beginning to shift, to move independently, just as mine had. The first stage of separation. The first recognition that what we see isn't necessarily what we are. "Do you see it?" I asked. "I see. There's someone else there, another me, and he's—" Jacob's voice filled with wonder and horror. "He's looking back at me the same way I'm looking at him. We're both reflections, both real and unreal at the same time. Yes, and the more you look, the more you'll see other versions of yourself, other timelines, other possibilities. They're all there, all the time. The lake just makes them visible." We stood there for an hour, maybe more, watching our reflections, watching them become more independent, more distinct, more real. And as we watched, I felt something shifting. The two of us, father and son, were synchronizing, beginning to exist in the same fractured state, the same quantum superposition. In one reality, we were both standing on the shore, solid and present. In another, we were both in the water, looking up at empty forest. In another, we were transitioning between the two states, half solid and half dissolved. The boundaries between realities were breaking down completely, and we were becoming creatures of the boundary itself, existing in all places simultaneously, freed from the tyranny of singular existence. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" I asked Jacob. "To exist in the same state as me, to be able to perceive the same truths." "Yes," he said, and his voice was my voice, our voices merging together, becoming one entity speaking with two mouths. "This is what I wanted." Time passed. Days, maybe, or hours, or years. It was impossible to tell anymore. The lake existed outside of linear time, and we were part of the lake now, subject to its non-temporal physics. Eventually, we stepped back from the water's edge. Both of us were changed. I could see it in Jacob's eyes, the same uncertainty I carried, the same multitude of memories from parallel timelines. He was fractured now, like me, and somehow that made us more connected than we'd ever been when we were both solid and singular. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We live," I said, "or we exist, or whatever you want to call it. We go back to the world and try to maintain enough cohesion to function. We become guardians of this place, warning others away while also welcoming those who need to see what we've seen. Like Coleman. Like Coleman. And like everyone else who's looked too long into the water and understood what they were seeing." We left the lake together, father and son, both real and both reflected, both existing and both perceived. The hike back to the trailhead felt like walking through a dream, familiar and strange, solid and insubstantial. When we reached the parking area, there were two trucks waiting, mine and Jacob's, both equally real, both belonging to us in different timelines. "Where will you go?" Jacob asked. "Back to my cabin, back to my job. I'll keep being a ranger, keep watching over October Mountain. Someone has to make sure people don't accidentally wander to the lake unprepared. And I'll do the same, in my timeline, in my reality." He smiled, and it was a sad smile, but also peaceful. We'll both be doing the same thing, just in different versions of the world. "Not so different," I said. "Not anymore. The realities are bleeding together. Soon there won't be a clear distinction between timelines. We'll all exist in a superposition of possibilities." We embraced, and in that moment of contact, I felt all the versions of us across all the timelines. The Emmys that had never found the lake and lived simple, solid lives. The Jacobs who had never been born because Ellen and I divorced before having children. The infinite variations of our relationship, all existing simultaneously, all real, all illusory. When we separated, I couldn't tell which of us was which anymore. We were both Michael Torres and both Jacob Torres and neither. We were father and son and the same person and separate people all at once. He got into his truck, I got into mine. Or maybe it was the other way around. The distinction didn't seem to matter anymore. I drove back to the ranger station as dawn was breaking. Jane was there, starting her early shift. She looked up when I walked in, and I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. Seeing me, but also seeing something else, some double image overlay of multiple versions of me. "Morning, Michael," she said carefully. Did you stay out all night?" "I was checking on something. It's taken care of now." She nodded slowly, but I could tell she sensed something had changed. Something fundamental about who I was had shifted, and even though she couldn't articulate what it was, she felt it on some instinctive level. I went to my desk and pulled out Coleman's file one more time. Read his final entry again. "The lake knows me now." I understood completely now. The lake didn't just know us. We became part of its knowledge. We became data points in its eternal observation of reality, examples of consciousness trying to understand itself, reflections becoming aware of their reflected nature. I added a new entry to my own notes. October 26, 1989, or 1992, or 2024. Time is meaningless now. I am Michael Torres, and I am not Michael Torres. I am a ranger, and I am an entity existing between realities. I am singular, and I am infinite. Jacob found me, or I found him, or we found each other. We are together now, in the way that fractured things can be together, existing in parallel superposition, separate but unified. If you're reading this, know that the lake is still there, still waiting, still offering the same terrible knowledge it has always offered. You can turn away, maintain your comfortable certainty about reality. Or you can look deeper, see what you really are, and join those of us who exist in the boundary. The choice is yours. But remember, once you see the truth, you can never unsee it. Once you know you're a reflection, you can never return to believing you're the original. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we were always meant to be reflections. Maybe the original was never anything more than the first reflection, and all the way down. It's just mirrors looking at mirrors, consciousness perceiving itself forever and ever, worlds without end. The lake knows me now, and I know the lake. We are one and many, real and reflected here and there. I am the boundary. I am the inversion. I am the truth beneath the appearance. I am Michael Torres, and I am so much more than that. We all are. Epilogue 2000. 24 or any time. A young ranger stood at the edge of Felton Lake, staring at their reflection. The water was perfectly still, perfectly reflective, perfectly impossible. Their name tag said Torres, but the first name was unclear in the fading light. S. Torres, or M. Torres, or J. Torres, the letters seemed to shift depending on the angle, on the observation, on which reality was currently asserting itself. In the water, the rangers saw their reflection, and standing beside their reflection, visible only in the inverted world of the lake, were other figures. Older rangers in uniforms from different eras, all with the same name tag, all named Torres. All versions of the same person, or all different people with the same name, or all reflections of an original that never existed in the first place. The ranger pulled out a weathered notebook, its pages yellowed with age despite being written just moments ago, or years ago, or not yet at all. Time was strange here. Time was meaningless here. They read the final entry. The lake knows me now. And they understood. Finally understood what Michael Torres had tried to explain, what Coleman had tried to warn about, what H.P. Lovecraft had wrapped in fiction, because the truth was too terrible to state plainly. We are all reflections. Reality is a hall of mirrors, and the lake is the one place where we can see the truth, that there is no solid ground beneath our feet, no original version of ourselves, no singular timeline that can be called real. There is only the boundary, the inversion, the reflection looking at itself, reflecting itself, consciousness observing itself into existence. The ranger smiled and knelt down at the water's edge, not to touch it. Not yet, but to look closer, to see more clearly, to understand more deeply. Behind them, another figure approached through the forest, another ranger, or the same ranger from a different angle, or a different version of the same story being told again. The cycle continued. The lake waited. The boundary remained. And in the perfect stillness of the water, countless versions of Michael Torres looked up from below, watching, remembering, warning, welcoming. Forever caught between realities. Forever part of the inversion. Forever reflected, forever real, forever questioning which of those states was true, and finally accepting that the question itself was the answer.